Today, I will talk about intercropping and the experiment that I did during my PhD project. So what I did, I looked the effect of mixing multiple spring wheat and faba bean cultivars in two different densities and three different environments. So before I go into detail, I would like to talk about some basic concern. For example, when we think about our current cropping system, this is the picture comes in our head. Monoculture is this cropping system is governed by a single type of crops, and this is a efficient cropping system. Is easy to manage, and it's also even increase the crop yield for a shorter period of time. But it brings a lot of problem with it. For example, it's declined the biodiversity as this cropping system is governed by only one kind of species. So it also support only particular type of insect, bird, and its food system. So basically, it declined the biodiversity. And to increase the production over time, we need to put more fertilizer in this cropping system, and thereby we are increasing the greenhouse gas emission in agriculture overall, and also as well increasing the pesticide use. So therefore, now is the time to think about different approach to make our cropping system more sustainable. And for that, one would be to diversify our cropping system. So how we do it? So we cultivate two or more than two crops in the same field, which is known as intercropping, where plants are cultivated simultaneously in the field during the growing season. So this cropping system is a bit complex, but it brings a lot of benefit over monoculture. For example, it gives higher yield with limited resources. For example, if you think about organic agriculture, where the soil nitrogen is lower than the conventional one, but if you add intercropping there, for example, cereal and legume crop mixture, where legume can take nitrogen from the air and cereal can take nitrogen from the soil, so it increase the overall resource use efficiency and thereby produce higher yield with limited resources. Also, when there is a problem for a climatic problem, and the farmer can lose some their yield, and if you input their intercropping, it can work as an insurance, because if one species fail, the other species can take the rest of the space and nutrient and still can give some production. It also reduces agrochemical use. It increases biodiversity in different level because it's a diverse cropping system. It provides diverse food source for different microorganisms or birds or animals, and as well as is reduce also incidence of pests and diseases. But the problem is the cropping system is complex to manage. Therefore, farmers are a bit reluctant to use this cropping system in their field. Therefore, we need to do more research to make it feasible, more productive, and usable by farmers. Therefore, in my today's talk, I divided it into two different parts. So in my first part, I will talk about the effect of mixture at early crop developmental stage, that is at crop emergence. And then in my second part, I will talk about the effect of mixture on the later growth stage, that means at grain yield. After that, I will talk about some challenges that I faced during my PhD work. And finally, some future research that I think important for intercropping, some recommendation about the future research. So the first part, the mixture at early crop developmental stage. So now the question is why it is important to look the effect of mixture at early crop developmental stage. Is because as a scientist, first what we do, we looked only the crops or the total yield, the final production. But what about the effect of germination, the crop emergence, and early root and shoot developmental stage? To understand how crop behave at the end, at the grain yield, we also need to understand how they behave at early growth stage to understand the complete interaction going on between them so that we can predict the later growth stage. Therefore, we concentrate on crop emergence, which we take at 23 days after sowing. And what is crop emergence? Crop emergence is the emergence of shoot from the germinated seed through the soil. And now the question comes, can we expect any interaction going on at that very early stage? Because the plants are still small, so they have still lots of space and resources. So probably there is nothing going on between crops, but so there is no interaction. But actually, there are some potential mechanisms that driven the mixture at early stage, and one of author mentioned about it. For example, the compensation. That means if one partner fail, the other partner can take its space and resources and compensate, and thereby give higher yield in the later stage. That could also happen if the one species have a smaller seed size or later germinate late, and then we can also see this kind of positive effect of mixture. So therefore, we ask a few questions at that early stage. The first is there a positive mixture effect of this crop mixture at that early growth stage? And the second question is, if so, does the early mixture effect depend on spring wheat cultivars or the faba bean cultivars or environment or sowing density? Then we ask the third question, can the domination of spring wheat in the mixture be observed already at crop emergence? Here I needed to mention that normally in the cereal legume crop mixture, that means in spring wheat and faba bean crop mixture, there is a tendency that the wheat cereal dominate the legume in the mixture and thereby control the whole resources. But we want to have a balanced crop mixture. We want that spring wheat don't get dominate over faba bean. So we want to see if we can already observe this domination at this early stage. And this brings the later one. Is there a legacy effect of early mixture on the later stage? That means the early domination that we observed, does it even increased over time? For that, we selected 10 spring wheat cultivars, and they are diverse on their plant height. This is their height score according to Bundessortesamt. When the score is smaller, plants are shorter. The higher the scores, the taller the plants are. They are also diverse on their brown rust resistance, and they are similar on their air emissions, maturity, and baking quality. So to bring even one more level of diversity, what we did, we created two different groups. So this is the first group, which contained the shortest cultivars and the tallest cultivars. So 5 cultivars. And we created cultivar mixture group 1. And then we created group 2 with 5 other spring wheat cultivars, which are more or less similar on their plant height. Then we take faba bean. We took 2 varieties of faba bean. First is Mallory, is the shorter variety, and then the fanfare was the tall variety. So as a experimental side, we had 2 experimental side. The first is Wiesen Good. This is our organic side. And the second is Klein Altendorf. CKA is our conventional side. So in the organic side, the soil nitrogen was lower and soil water content was higher compared to the conventional side. And as a method, first we had spring wheat at 12 levels, that means 10 cultivars and 2 cultivar mixture. We had faba bean 2 levels, we replicated twice. And then we have the crop mixture, which we mixed in substituted mixture, that means same proportion of both species. So we had all these treatments first in high densities. So we took 120% of the base density, and then we had it low density. That means 80% of the base density. So that brings total 76 treatments per side. And if we consider the faba being doubly replicated, we had 80 treatments. And then with the 4 replication, we had 320 plots per side. So this experiment we had in SIGA 2020, we had in VisionGood 2020, and we had VisionGood 2021. And this is the sowing date. So in 2020, in both sides, we sown end of March. And the year later, in 2021, in VisionGood, we sown around the beginning of March, depending on the temperature and climate condition. And for the first question, for the early stage, we took some parameters. So first we took the crop emergence counting. So we took a 1 meter long row. We selected from middle of the plot at 23 days after sowing, and we count how many plants emerged from the soil. And then we had first biomass cut, which we did at 52 days after sowing. Again, 1 meter long rows we selected. And then we had our second biomass cut. We had it 82 days after sowing from the other side of the plot. Before I go into detail, we need to understand some indices that we used to compare crop mixture with the monoculture. So we used land equivalent ratio. This is well known in crop mixture. Lots of scientists, they use these parameters to compare mixtures with monoculture. And we use emergence equivalent ratio. So basically, they are more or less same. Is the relative land area that was required for the crop monoculture to produce the same biomass. So biomass for land equivalent ratio or the crop emergence for emergence equivalent ratio to observe in the mixture. So basically, we calculated LER by adding 2 partial LER from 2 crop partners, and each partial LER we measured by taking the biomass from mixture divided by the biomass in monoculture. So we get the 2 partial LER for wheat and bean, and then we add them together to get LER. For emergence equivalent ratio, so EER, we did exactly the same, but instead of biomass, we took the emerge crop number and we get EER. So if we put this on the graph, and this would be the LER equal to 1 line, and then if we put 2 PLER of 2 species against each other, and if we get the 2 points like this, which is the LER is lower than 1, that means mixture was not good compared to monoculture. If we get LER above 1, that means mixture was good compared to monoculture. And if LER equal to 1, then mixture and monoculture were performing exactly the same. And then one more indices we used is competitive ratio. We used it to identify the dominant partner. So in cereal and legume, we wanted to see who dominating whom and to indicate the degree of dominancy. And we calculated competitive ratio of spring wheat first on biomass and then on emergence. So we take the partial land equivalent ratio of spring wheat and then we divided it the partial land equivalent ratio of faba bean. And exactly we get it also for the emergence. Okay, that brings our first question is there a positive mixture effect of spring wheat faba bean crop mixture at early growth stage? That means at crop emergence. For that, we need to see how the emergence was looking like at 3 environments. So first is SICA 2020, where we observed very low spring wheat emergence, whereas in VisionGood 2021, we observed low faba bean emergence. However, in VisionGood 2020 the emergence was as expected, so they germinate well in that environment. So to see the mixture effect at the early growth stage, we took a partial emergence equivalent ratio. And then again, if partial emergence equivalent ratio is higher than 0.5, that means mixture was beneficial over monoculture. So now if we look at the numbers, we see at the first environment, in out of 4 cases, 3 cases, the partial emergence equivalent ratio was higher than 0.5. That means mixture was beneficial over monoculture. We also observed the same in Vision Good 2021, the third environment, but not in Vision Good 2020. So that means when the germination was lower, compared to the monoculture, the mixture was performing well because they can take the extra resources and then produce higher crop emergence compared to their respective monoculture. Therefore, we can say that there is a positive mixture effect of spring wheat and faba bean crop mixture at that early crop developmental stage. And now brings the second question. Which factor was affecting this early positive mixture effect? Was it because of the spring wheat cultivar, or the faba bean, or the environment, or the sowing density? Therefore, we took the emergence equivalent ratio, so EER, when we did ANOVA on it, and then we observed the spring wheat cultivar and environment and its interaction had a highly significant effect on that early positive mixture effect of crop mixture. And now we try to put it on graph. So we put 3 environments when we put different spring wheat cultivars. And then this is the LER equal to 1 line. That means if the cultivars performing above LER equal to 1, the mixture was beneficial. Below that, mixture was not. And we can easily see in the first environment in SICA 2020, different cultivars behaving very differently. Whereas we also observed in Vision Good 2021, the third environment, but not in Vision Good 2020. So therefore, we concluded here that the early mixture effect depends on spring wheat cultivar, environment, and their interaction. And the third question was, can the domination of spring wheat in the mixture be observed already at crop emergence? For that, first, we took crop emergence, that means partial equivalent emergence equivalent ratio, which we took at 23 days after sowing. So in that case, if we look at the first environment, that means the first graph, we see that the spring wheat emergence was already more than 0.5. That means was already more than the thick black line. That means spring wheat was already dominating the faba bean, but faba bean was not suppressed because the faba bean was not lower than 0.5. However, in the next environment, the next time, which was 52 days after sowing, the later on, we look at the biomass of 2 partners, and there we see in the first environment, in SICA 2020, the domination of spring wheat was increased over time, but now it's also suppressing the faba bean. That means faba bean was lower than 0.5. And this spring wheat domination also started in the last environment, that means in Vision Good 2021. Whereas later on, as day 82 days after sowing, we observed the spring wheat was dominating the faba bean in all 3 environments. Therefore, we can conclude that spring wheat domination in the mixture was noticed in all the environment, and this domination of spring wheat in the mixture can be already observed at crop emergence, as we already observed at early stage at the SICA 2020. And this brings the last question of this part: is there a legacy effect of early mixture on the later growth stage? For that, we took competitive ratio. We put competitive ratio of PLER, that means over biomass, against the competitive ratio of spring wheat at PEER, that means against the crop emergence. And there we observed a strong correlation between them. That means the the dominancy of spring wheat that started at early stage, it just increased over time. This pattern we also observed in another environment in Vision 2020, but only for high density. Therefore, we can say that in small head start of spring wheat at emergence, favored dominance at later root stage and lead to superiority over faba bean in terms of plant biomass. So now I suggest some implication out of this finding. For example, this finding that I mentioned just now is important to address the low emergence under climate extreme and increasing environmental stress. That means due to the climate extreme, we are expecting in many cases lower emergence. So in that case, if we suggest farmer to use crop mixture than monoculture, then they will benefit from that because in crop mixture, even one partner fail, the other partner can still take the resources and give a higher production or higher emergence. And the second is farmer can use this knowledge to manage the competition in the mixture. As we saw, the spring wheat domination was already observed very early. So they can manage this competition by probably reducing the cereal swing density or removing some cereal at the early stage. And the third is the next step could be to integrate this finding into this decision support tools to design the better crop mixture that could balance the early competition in the future productivity. And with that, I will start my second part where I talk with total grain yield. And for that, here I would like to answer two questions. First is, does the mixture effect on total grain yield depend on the spring wheat cultivar or faba bean cultivar environment or crop management? And then the last one, is there a correlation between grain yield and plant height? Because the plant height normally significantly affect the grain yield. So we wanted to see if the plant height of spring wheat cultivars has a correlation between the total grain yield in the mixture. So therefore, we took two parameters. First, we had the second biomass cut, which we had 82 days after sowing. There we also had the plant height. And then we had cut just before harvest from the middle of the plot. These are two parameters we took to measure the mixture effect at total grain yield. And here we also use the indices, the LER that I explained previously. That means when LER is lower than 1, mixture was not beneficial. LER above 1, mixture was beneficial. And one more indices we used here is absolute mixture effect. And we calculated it by the difference between the total grain yield in the mixture and the average yield of two monoculture. If we put it on graph, that means if AME is negative, then mixture performing negative. If it's positive, then mixture is positive over monoculture. And that brings the first question is does the mixture effect on total grain yield depend on spring wheat cultivars or faba bean cultivars or environment or crop management? And for that, we took two indices. We had absolute mixture effect and land equivalent ratio. We had ANOVA on these two indices on the total grain yield. And then we observed first that the spring wheat cultivars and the faba bean cultivar doesn't have any effect, any significant effect on the crop mixture, although it has a very slight interaction effect on AME, but not LER. So here we wanted to say, because this cultivar were developed for monoculture, not for intercropping, therefore probably we haven't observed any cultivar effect on intercropping. On the next thing, we looked the density and environment have a very significant effect on crop grain yield in intercropping. However, we also observed a complex interaction, that means many interaction going on between many parameters. So therefore, we say the mixture effect on total grain yield depends on multiple factors, first of all, and then many interaction also occurring between them. So just to explain this interaction, what we did here we took total grain yield of spring wheat with two faba bean cultivars. So in the x-axis is the faba bean cultivar Madhuri, and the y-axis is the faba bean cultivar Fanfare. And we want to see how the different cultivar behave with different faba bean cultivars. And this one is for the high density. And then we can see in this high density, the sorbos, the one spring wheat cultivar, were constantly doing worse with both faba bean cultivars. Whereas some varieties like Javier Starlight, Lennox, and SC Wahab, they were doing well with both faba bean cultivars. However, if we look at the low density here, so basically this is the same, but in case of low density, we observe this pattern of interaction is completely changed. Like the just mood is doing well with Fanfare, but not necessarily with other faba bean cultivar Madhuri. However, in case of Quintus, it's doing well with Madhuri, but not necessarily with Fanfare. Therefore, again, there is multiple factors interaction going on, so it's not easy to just conclude considering one factor and conclude the effect of mixture. This brings the last question is there a correlation between the total grain yield in the mixture and the plant height of spring wheat cultivars? For that, what we did, we took the total grain yield in mixture and we put it against the spring wheat height. So we see a slight correlation between these two parameters. But the total, it's with the total grain yield. So that means it's with the both spring wheat yield and with faba bean yield. So now we want to know if the correlation was with the spring wheat yield or with the faba bean yield. Therefore, in the next graph, we just took the spring wheat yield on the y-axis and we correlate with spring wheat height. And here we observed the slight correlation again. However, when we took the faba bean yield, we observed this correlation only with one faba bean cultivar. That means Fanfare. And Fanfare was our taller cultivar compared to Mallory. So therefore, but however, this interaction or this correlation, we only observed in one environment out of three. It was only in Vision 2021, but not in two other environments. Therefore, we concluded here that a significant yet weak positive correlation we observed between spring wheat plant height and total grain yield in the mixture, but only in one environment. So with that, I would like to say some implementation based on that finding. For example, to see the better result of intercropping, it is important to develop a site-specific intercropping system because the intercropping depends very much which site and what climate is on that side. And that the second is during this process is important to guide the breeder and farmer to consider that the different interaction going on the different factors. So it's also important to consider when you design this intercropping system. And then we also recommend to have a specific breeding program for intercropping as we haven't observed any cultivar mixture for intercropping. And then during this cultivar selection, it is important to consider the cultivar height because as we observe a slight correlation between height with the grain yield. And that brings some challenges that I faced during my work. For example, in Sika 2020, we observed a huge weed infestation. This is Canopodium. And then we in Vision Good, no, this is also in Sika 2020. It was aphid infestation. Then we also calculate how aphid infestation was lower in the mixture compared to the monoculture. Then we saw also brood beetle infestation in Vision Good 2020, which actually reduced the quality of bean and created some broken bean after harvest. But one main problem that we faced in one environment is when the bean was already dried, the wheat was not ready to harvest. So we needed to wait for for both of them to dry. So it makes bean over dried. And what happened then bean after during processing, it get broken. And it makes the separation very complicated because the broken bean end up into the wheat. So it was not possible because normally in wheat and bean mixture, you separate them according to their seed size. So the bigger seed is just stay on the top and the smaller seed come down. That's how you separate wheat and bean. But when the bean is broken, they get small, so they're mixed up with the wheat. So it's impossible to separate them. So that we faced during my experiment. So based on that, I suggested some future research. For example, I suggested to develop compatible spring wheat and faba bean cultivars so that we can sown and harvest them together, so it would not create the over dry bean in the end. And then I recommend to have the new machinery for complex intercropping system to simplify and manage this complexity of intercropping. I recommend to weed and pest management in multi-cropping system because sometimes it's complicated to control the weed or pest when there is one different kind of species exist. So probably it's not the same management. So it's important to develop this weed and pest management in multi-cropping system. And then it's also important to create easy and clear separation process because this is the bigger challenge when you face when you harvested both crops together and then you need to separate them. And it's also time consuming and sometimes it's not even possible as I show in the picture. And then other recommendation could be to develop a new market for that product. So that means at the end, if you cannot separate the two product differently, you still have a market. For example, I have an example for that. Like if there is some pea on the wheat, you still can make bread, and its bread contain 10% pea, which is increase the protein quality. We just need to make the market for that. So that therefore, if we want to integrate this sustainable cropping system, the intercropping system, we need to go through this problem, and we need to make it manageable and productive for the farmer, and only then the farmer will adapt this sustainable cropping system. And with that, I would like to first thank you, PhenoRob, to fund this project and make it possible to do this research. I'd like to thank my supervisor, Professor Thomas Doring, and my colleagues in Vision my colleagues in Alwell, and my friends from the PhenoRob who also helped me during my work. And with and also thank you very much, everyone.